So that self-acknowledgement of low self-worth is a spiritual killer. We feel that deeply inside ourselves, and as children, we felt that. We stayed in it for a while, and then we went, no way, no more. Fuck this. We're not doing that no more. We're not gonna fucking do that to ourselves and admit that we're worthless, because we're not. And we take that stand. We get angry. We start calculating. Then, because we're left unresolved, the pain of rejection is so terrible. We're left unresolved. We take our stand, say no, and stop to ourselves. I'm not gonna up my information to anybody anymore. When it comes time to self-express naturally, I'm gonna lie. And lying begins. Lying then to a child is an influence. The ego speaks to us and says, lie. When you self-express, they reject you. Therefore, you must not be worthy. Therefore, you're unloved. Nobody loves you. And we hear that in our ego's voice. And it's not in silence. Silence comes from God, the life source. But what we hear in our own voices eventually, these things that are self-defeating, self-destructive, and then we become emptied. When we don't self-express and accept that knowledge of self, we become, well, when we do, we become filled. The spiritual pleroma is that sense of need-meeting fullness that we get from God. It's a thing. But we have to be able to do what we did as children, the natural child, and that's say, yes, this is what I'm feeling, and we speak that out loud, and then balance it later. Or balance it after the feeling acknowledged and guided by our parents. But because we don't get that, we get rejection because they're afraid, because they themselves were rejected and turned. This is how we get turned as people. It's not like on TV. They're not demons that are coming to eat your flesh or burn you alive. It's not like that. It's all symbolism for what happens to us internally, and as the result of being influenced by two now. One spiritual influence of light and truth and light, of self. And it all begins with knowledge of self, and then we project that into the world, ourselves, our spirituality, our uniqueness into the world through our conclusions, intent, and the spiritual projection through that behavior that acts that stuff out, the intent itself. So when we project into the world our spiritual nature, if we're distorted and calculating thought with the dark feminine of the evil spirit influence, and not the sacred feminine element that truth and wisdom are, the life source, sourcing self, the unique knowing of self, when we do that, we project the dark spiritual entity of ourselves into this world. And that's how people are either enamored by and loved by us, or they are disgusted by what they see coming out of us spiritually when we act out. Now that we have this other snake in us, or the electromagnetic pulse, offering us fear of our higher selves and telling us not to self-express, we become emptied by that. When we become emptied, because we have to self-express, feel acknowledged to get that fullness, and we need each other for that. And when we don't have it, we're alone. We feel alone as children. We got nowhere to go to because it's mom and dad doing the rejection, or someone the child is dependent on is doing the rejection. Then we become emptied of that spiritual fullness. That emptiness feels like fucking crap. It hurts, man, being alone and away from God, because that's how we feel connected to God, is through that sense of spiritual fullness. Anyway, we become drained to that, and as a child, we don't know what the fuck is going on. We just know that we're hurting, and we're in need. Then we take a look around, get out of our thought of that hurt and that pain, that unresolved hurt and pain and fear. Take a look around into the physical world, and then we start looking for distractions from that feeling of emptiness. The first distraction, let's say it's a cookie for a child. Oh, we get to eat a cookie. That takes us away from the pain and the fear. And we feel better because it tastes good. We become happier in that moment. And then we go, oh, it's a hunger. spiritual emptiness is a hunger, and all I gotta do to distract myself from this hunger, longing, it's a longing, it's not a hunger, longing for the fullness to return, is to seek from the physical world distractions from the pain and emptiness, loneliness. That fullness, the pluralist fullness, it's a female spirit, female God in heaven, that is also conduited through some kind of thing, like in the earth and electromagnetic and blah blah blah. I forget. Anyway, that longing for the fullness to return turns into a hunger after we discover that a cookie will remove us from pain, or whatever your thing was as a child to remove yourself from pain for the first time. Now it's a hunger. We translate that into a hunger. So we become hungry then for outside distraction to get us away from the internal turmoil of unresolved pain and fear. Acting as its own dark spiritual influence, telling us that it's safe to lie. And it's a savior because it's showing us how to self-protect from the pain that we see coming in terms of our forethought in thought of self-expression. So we think of self-expression. Ego comes in to say the other influence, the dark spiritual influence, the dark feminine of the evil spirit influence says, no, don't do that. You'll feel pain. You'll be rejected. You'll be humiliated, ridiculed, and embarrassed for having emotional responses to your human truth. So lie. And if we listen, we have to as children. Not that we want to. We think it's a savior coming to rescue us. So we think it's God as children because we're kids. This has been going on since day one of humanity's reproduction of the physical body. Fuck. Anyway, so now we're reacting to the lower self-influence, the dark feminine, and the ego. And that kills the spiritual life inside the knowledge of emotional truth of the living self. You see? And now we're not... Our intent is now with darkness. Our intent used to be with self-expression, and then we projected that into the world after acting it out to the intent. But now it's distorted. Lower self comes in and says, no, not going to do that. We become dark. We lie, and now project the spirit of lies into the world through our behavior as children, protecting ourselves emotionally. And think it's a good thing. Of course, the child is going to think it's a good thing because it keeps yourself safe. But we don't know what the real thing is. Sure, we feel safe and good for the moment. We go eat our cookie as a child. We feel better from the pain, from prior rejections. And I don't care how you reject your child or how our parents reject. In what 200,000 or 300,000 forms of rejection that there is? Any form of rejection turns the child into the lower self-animal instinct to survive for humans, and that's emotional self-protection. So we grow up lying, deceiving to ourselves, and then we begin to see emotion as the enemy. So we push that shit out. Not that it's pushed out, we pretend it's not there anymore. And we learn to justify it in a darkness by saying things like, well, it'll keep me safe. And that makes sense to a child, so we're going to keep doing it. And that looks like light, doesn't it? It's not. It's a trick. And the whole thing is internal. It attacks us in childhood. Evil enters the child through the rejection model of parenting. Now, that translates for most of us into deadened spiritual selves, and we just comply with everything. So we don't have to raise a fucus, create a big mess in which we have to deal with, because we just run away from that because it's safe. Others who have experienced harsher forms of rejection get real bored of cookies soon, quickly. And they're looking for harder things. Like me when I was a child. When did I start doing drugs and drinking alcohol? I was probably 6 or 7. Started smoking and then drinking my dad's beer. I couldn't deal with the hard stuff as a child, but the beer, no problem. Me and all my brothers did. And then eventually it took me into the back alleys of being without a home for 3 full-time years. We become consumption pigs for the distraction quality of the physical world, taking ourselves away from the spiritual world that's internal. That's communication with the life source, sourcing self. Knowledge is self. So you now understand the electromagnetic pulse as being the symbols, or the snake as being symbols.
What we're being confronted with is basically this notion that if we take 2 substances, we can make a 3rd substance out of this. 3 as such is always the power of transformation. It is the end result for the alchemist, basically saying, I took certain things and I created something new.